Thank you very much. As we talk about the financial crisis here today, I'm sort of reminded of Winston Churchill, who made a comment about, I think, a fellow legislator that, or he may have even made it about all men, that he's the sort of fellow who stumbles over the truth, but then quickly picks himself up and hurries on as if nothing has happened. And I think we've, in this crisis, have stumbled across certain truths, and we are hurrying on as if nothing had happened. And two of them I would like to talk about today, and I think we go through lax regulation and inadequate governance, and I want to talk about both. One is governance, and the other one relating to governments. Although governance appears to have been given a slight boost, corporate governance, in the wake of the Sarbanes-Oxley, the agency problems created by the separation of owners and managers continue to plague. Alan Greenspan, for example, said it was a failure of self-interest to protect shareholder interest. Well, I think self-interest was working really fine for management. It was the structure of corporate governance that failed, and I think we would like to put forward a modest proposal at this point that has been discussed by a number of leading directors and such. At a time when U.S. corporations right now are facing high debt burdens and plummeting sales, there's uncertain futures, board members continue to lack the basic means of developing an independent assessment of the issues confronting the corporations and management. Governance issues are deeper and more complicated than the few bad actors that we keep trying to say it's all about. The CEO, the bad CEO, let's get rid of him and it'll all be fine. We still seem to be following sort of a 20th century golden age model, when in fact it's much more complex. We have basically two options that have been presented with the Obama administration, I think, on corporate governance. One is do nothing. The other is to modestly increase shareholder votes and shareholder participation as a whole. I think both of those are insufficient. The first stumbling over the truth was that the response was that we now immerse directors more in administrative, regulatory, and financial detail. They spend more time in committees. They perform an array of oversight functions now since Sarbanes-Oxley, since Enron. But it's all been focused sort of on legal advice and accounting standards. In all other areas, including something like core compensation, which related to the heads I win, tails you lose sort of bonus structures, their capacity as board members to follow through on their responsibility has been hampered by a basic institutional constraint which requires them to rely almost wholly on management as a source of facts and analyses, which may be designed primarily to persuade rather than perform. It doesn't have to be about fraud or have such. We just have to realize that management is there to persuade sometimes. They have a point of view. So should the directors. If there ever was a golden age when we could believe in smart, successful business people from all walks of life, could meet several times a year on the basis of their general business acumen and intellect, and successfully impart sort of guidance, wisdom, and oversight to corporate managers for the benefit of the ultimate principles of shareholders. And to be fair, that did succeed in the post-war period, or at least did not prevent failure. Our more recent examples from Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, and GM suggest that golden age is past. The complexities of business, and most importantly, finance and financial tools and risk, have grown so much so rapidly that it simply strains credulity to believe that part-time directors, some serving on many boards, can have the ability to fully provide the oversight and guidance necessary to manage the divergence between the interests of the principals and their agents. A Carnegie Mellon study recently, for example, pointed out that only 8% of public companies have a risk management committee. Government did act with Sarbanes-Oxley, we know, but I think we hit the symptom and not the larger disease. The fundamental problem wasn't that the board of directors weren't independent enough, though we could debate some parts of that. Many were insufficiently independent in the true sense of that word, either before or after Sarbanes-Oxley. That means they didn't have or don't have sufficient resources of independent analysis to truly manage that principal agent problems. So at present, if we look at the board structure, information is circulated to directors mainly and controlled by management in a board minute book that usually arrives a week to 2 weeks before, with the result that meetings of the board are often reduced to a series of presentations before an expert audience, but one that has not been exposed to the immediate and imminent financial, organizational, and ethical issues facing the company. The boards now will intermediately engage in consultants on an as-needed basis. They'll say, well, I'll hire somebody like McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or others who address some economic consequences of proposed mergers and who evaluate some problem that is caught. Now, and they will be able to both work for both management and the board, which again essentially creates the conflict of interest. These resources and consultants and the focus on auditors are indispensable ad hoc resources. But there may be a bigger solution, and that's what we'd like to think about. Perhaps the discussion of an independent type of secretariat to the board, a professional staff for the board that will probe, analyze, and critique the information and analysis provided by management, and to be a staff that's unconflicted by any duty or any remuneration to management, which is key. Now, this model isn't so radical. If you know anything about private equity, you know that private equity, when it invests in a corporation, takes a shareholder position, they take board seats. The members of the board of that private equity firm do not sit there passively listening to management's presentations. They have a staff. They go back and do analysis. They present probing questions. They are actively protecting shareholder interests, their shareholder interest. And there's no reason that that best practice couldn't be expanded, that concept, to a broader public entity. John Reed and I talked about his experience with the New York Stock Exchange, in which he tried using the existing resources to sort of have that in looking at those problems. And some others have tried using existing resources. But we think it might be time to change the organizational support by creating sort of some new institutions that could act as the external research and information on an ongoing basis. And we could create a new corporate best practice, perhaps, by assembling a group of distinguished advisors and staff for the purpose of establishing permanent organizations that would be able to support the boards of directors. And for such a plan to occur, it will take forward-thinking boards and open-minded CEOs to look at this. And the government, perhaps, could also be a sponsor based on its shareholder interest in so many corporations that when it exits, might exit with a more strengthened corporate governance system. Now, the second part I'd like to bring is maybe a mystery to the audience. This is a $2.8 trillion market, and according to Goldman Sachs, it has $1 trillion of unfunded pension liabilities, $70 billion of unfunded health care in just California, $47 billion in New York, and $30 billion in Michigan. And it's a sector that the Federal Reserve says is growing faster than any other sector except borrowing than the federal government. Individuals are investing in this sector at a rate of about $100 billion a year. The sector I'm talking about is the municipal bond market. State and local governments, not-for-profit institutions, higher ed, and even healthcare and hospitals go for funding. It is a looming threat to the recovery and cost to all taxpayers and ratepayers. We're about to see, over the next couple of years, what happens when an immovable object meets the irresistible force. In this case, the irresistible force is the increased financing bearing down on the states and local governments from the physical infrastructure, the health care, the pension obligations that we talked about, and servicing their debt. It's exacerbated by demographic trends and widespread expectations of slower economic growth out of the current economic environment. And it's essentially a matter of arithmetic, which ultimately is inescapable. Unfortunately, the immovable object is an observation that I've had over 30 years that the practices in the municipal finance market have very little to do with basic principles of finance. The good news is that we'll get to see how this collision turns out. Bad news, of course, is there isn't some graduate seminar experiment, and as taxpayers, we're all going to be on the hook. This market is what is known as financing in the dark, as Bloomberg so aptly put it in some hard-hitting articles most recently. And Arthur Levitt has spoken out, with others who I've worked with, about the need for basic reforms. And indeed, Mary Shapiro just today was talking about the need to level the playing field between corporate and municipal finance. Yeah. Let me just give you some context so you know the need here. First, you have to understand there's no common accounting language in municipal finance, as there is in corporate. There is a government accounting standard board that issues accounting guidelines, but the board is not independently funded. It cannot enforce its own standards. Matter of fact, some states have actually voted to ignore the GASB and then finally relented. A 2008 study found that 25% of municipal borrowers are 3 years late in providing financial data. A 2008 study showed out of 4,000 issuers in California, 1,700 were delinquent in giving their state financial statements. Result? No penalty. Nobody enforces that. Credit rating agencies, however, the only unanimously designated bad actor in the crisis, and everyone agrees the rating agencies were a problem, except the rating agencies, have had a double standard of rating in the credit quality of municipal issuers and corporate, which make it even more difficult to understand. And in the past 10 years, there's been a huge transfer of risk from the corporate to the public sectors whose full cost is just now being understood. And almost nothing has been done to address this. State and local governments have, in hospitals and art museums, colleges, entered into tens of billions of dollars of complex swaps. They issued $160 billion of some arcane security called auction rate securities, which blew up. And after over 2 years of that crisis, saddling taxpayers, issuers have hired the same firms in the same manner to redo the damage that those firms did to those municipalities. And the discussion from my Princeton colleague yesterday about the Build America bonds and is accurate, and the popularity of a new subsidized program called Build America bonds is incomplete, though, in that the pricing of all these securities is generally largely inefficient and largely borne by the taxpayers in higher cost. And we should understand that these officials, and just wrapping up, to have the sensitivity to of this imbalance of power, is that, we do not pay public finance officials anywhere near the bankers paid. They don't provide any career opportunities to do a great job. They get no bonus, no headhunters call them. There's nowhere to go. And because there's no central regulator of this market, there's nothing really being focused on these problems except for some egregious changes. So on the table are issues like providing a municipal bond exchange, providing Sarbanes-Oxley sort of certifications of conflict of interest, and providing a more professionalism to support state and local governments. So I think in wrapping up and looking at a corporate governance issue and a problem in state and local government that you may not have been thinking about are widespread and issues of national concern right now that should be addressed. Thank you for this time to present this to you. If I have time for questions, I'm not sure.
Yes, Joe, thank you very much. Very informative. Herman Bowles from Jones Lang LaSalle and Bowles Capital Partners. And one of the interesting things about corporate governance is as we look at the demographic projection for the future, in the United States anyway, within the next 25, 30 years, the majority is going to be the minority, i.e. the minority is going to be the majority. So with that said, and looking at studies by Catalyst and other Executive Leadership Council and other groups, what is your view on the need to have more diversity in the boardroom and the fact that some European companies are actually, for gender, making a law that there has to be, and what impact does that have on corporate governance and competitiveness of organizations?
I think diversity in all parts is important for the proper functioning of corporate governance. But again, it is a one part of the answer, not the solution. Putting a more diverse board together, but still dependent upon management for their analysis and all of their information, is not going to allow them to be able to exercise more. We'll still be bringing that golden age aspect of different views and saying they know the right questions to ask and there are some additional points. But it's the evaluation of those answers from management that is important. And it is what we else bring into that boardroom in terms of providing the proper balance between management and the board. It is still interesting that Jamie Dimon describes his board, the board of directors, as his board, that he was bringing his board to Washington to meet. And I spoke with some colleagues and said, does anyone know who the chairman of the J.P. Morgan board is? No, but we all know Jamie, don't we? So, but we know we need to have some sort of more balance. Diversity is a catalyst for those things, but still needs to be supported with other types of resources. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, and look forward to the rest of the conference.